Hi, I'm Brian,
Hello, I'm Mark.
and welcome to the Therapy Shed podcast.
Hello,
Hello,
here we are again.
episode 2.
Episode 2. What's the point in therapy? This episode's called.
Sounds like an interesting question to ask, isn't it?
Aye.
What's the point in therapy? But before we get into the topic, it's my turn to ask the questions this week. So,
Aye.
last week I found them really interesting. I was a little bit taken back by the questions, or what type of questions I was expecting, and the answers weren't the type of answers that I was expecting to give. So it was interesting. So I'm looking forward to see what answers you give this week, Mark.
Yeah, definitely. I promise I haven't done any revision.
Okay, good.
But no, I do like them as a set of questions as well. And as I say, I haven't planned any answers or anything. But yeah, we'll see what comes up. I'm a bit nervous actually.
Really? Don't be nervous.
Oh, thanks.
And I think one of the good things about doing these questions, which I think is a great idea. Often when people come into therapy, we do a thing called outcome measures, which we there's lots of different ones out there, Core 10 and ARCADS and things like that, where we ask the client to answer a couple of questions, which just gives the therapist a little bit of an idea of where the clients are on that particular day, or sort of how they're feeling, and these questions almost feel like that, like we discussed last episode, that depending on the answers, I think depends on how you're feeling on the day. I think if you ask me these questions today, I'd possibly give you not similar answers to the ones I gave you last week. So,
yeah, definitely. That's interesting. That I completely empathise. I understand where you're coming from with that. I agree, because I think it does tell you a bit about when you, as you say, when we use the measures during clinical sessions. I think the clients can often, I suppose it speaks back to them. Their answers sometimes reveal to them where they are at that moment, on that day or at that stage of their life, that they maybe wouldn't have recognised unless they were asked that question. And yeah, these questions are a little bit like that, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it might even be worth thinking about in the future. You ask me these questions again, and I ask you them again as well, and to compare what answers we give at that time, and see if they are different. Because again, when we use them with clients, often or certainly I do, is after 4, 5, 6 weeks, we'll compare the answers that they give, which can sometimes give a good idea of what progression's being made, or the way they're feeling now. Because sometimes in therapy, when people come after 2 or 3, 4 weeks, people will say, "Oh, I don't feel like anything's changed." But if I can get those questionnaires out and say, "Well, when you came in week 1, you were scoring, say 20 on a Core 10, where today you and last week you scored like a 13 or a 12, so it's coming down. So there is some change. You might just not be fully aware because it's not like obvious changes."
Yeah, it's step by step, which is, we always say, that's a big part of therapy, isn't it? It's that understanding that it is a process as opposed to it just one big leap or one big drop or whatever it may be. Yeah, definitely.
Which I'm sure we'll get into at some point during this podcast.
Oh yes.
So, are you ready for the questions? 10 questions.
I'm ready.
Question 1. What is your favourite word?
Laugh.
Laugh. It's an interesting word, isn't it? Laugh. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the sound of the word as well, and of course I like the the meaning of it.
Yeah, it is a good word, laugh. I like the way it sort of that F goes on a little bit longer, doesn't it?
Yeah, considering it's not even in the spelling as well. But yeah, definitely, it's a good snappy, and yeah, I like that one.
Question 2. What is your least favourite word?
How long have you got? Least favourite word. Cynical.
Yeah. It's an interesting word as well, isn't it? Cynical.
I think it's just, yeah, and I think it's just full of negative and destructive connotations. Cynical. And yeah, just my. I could have been here all day telling you words either because of the sound or the meaning of them or both.
Yeah.
Do me head in, but we'll go with cynical.
And I don't know if other people who are listening could pick up on that, but I could tell the difference between you said the two words.
Oh right, okay, yeah,
Laugh
like the
and
sound,
cynical.
the way I said them.
Yeah, just the way you said them, and you know the tone in how you said them. It was
That wasn't intentional either, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, question 3. What turns you on?
Staying with that theme, definitely the sound of laughter, sound of someone properly laughing, uncontrollably laughing, and I'd probably go one further than that and say particularly a child laughing.
Yeah, it's quite contagious, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and it's just, I think as well with talking about laughter and humour, and as I say, the sound of someone laughing as well, properly laughing. When I say properly, I guess what I mean is like they couldn't stop if they tried. You know that feeling where your legs go and you feel like it's a real, as I say, an uncontrollable laughter. It's just brilliant. I absolutely love it. But I also think I remember hearing once somebody say that laughter, I think it was either Billy Connolly or Richard Pryor or someone like that in an interview, and they said, well, laughter is you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable. You're allowing people to see into your kind of true self when you laugh. Definitely. And I love that idea as well.
Yeah, even talking about that makes me feel like laughing. It's
yeah.
Strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm definitely with you on that
definitely.
one now.
Sound of laughter, yeah.
Okay, so question 4. What turns you off?
Self-entitlement.
Okay.
Self-entitlement. Yeah. I just really... I was going to say all people kind of boasting, people feeling the need to like subordinate you with how great they think they are, but for me that's a strand of self-entitlement, do you know what I mean? Or it comes under the same umbrella of self-entitlement. Yeah, just don't like it.
Okay. Question 5. What sound or noise do you love?
I actually do love this, but I know it sounds quite cliched, but I do like the sound, like when if I'm walking the dog along the beach, and I like the sound, and it's being nice weather, but I like the sound of the waves just washing in and out. I do like that sound, and the kind of a nice breeze.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's cliche, but I do think it's something that resonates with people. I think it is a calming sound, isn't it? I do think it's a lot of people relate to the sounds of sort of the waves as being quite calming and nice.
Definitely. And it's just I think it roots me as well. It gets you it's a brilliant, as we would say, a grounding exercise. Yeah, 100%. I like that.
Okay, question 6. What sounds or noise do you hate?
Sound or noise do I hate? I hate the sound of an ambulance siren. I actually do hate that as a sound as well. I find it really irritating, but it's also, obviously, never good, is it? Never good when there's always something not very And at the same time, I guess it's brilliant. You know, we're incredibly lucky that we live in a time where we've got those provisions, those services, and you know, the real heroes who do that job. You know, ambulance paramedics and that sort of thing. But I just, something always turns inside me. You know, I always feel a sense of dread when I hear that sound.
Yeah, and it's quite ear piercing, isn't it?
It scares me as well. It does. Even if I can see an ambulance and then I see them putting the light on, and then you hear the sound, I still go,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think I even find when I'm driving and you hear a siren, you sort of looking around, aren't you, to see if it's behind you, to sort of move out the way to let it past, and and when you can't see it, that fills you with a little bit of sort of, you know, sort of, I don't want to say anxiety, but you know, it fills you with a little bit of.
Oh no, it does.
Where's it coming from? What direction's it coming from?
I was just thinking that. Yeah, definitely, it's one of the things that is guaranteed to, and I guess that's the intention. You know, that's the function of it. But yeah, it definitely no. I don't like that sound.
Yeah. Okay. Question 7. My favourite question. What is your favourite swear word?
Oh, again, how long have you got? Well, if I remember rightly, you said your favourite swear word was twat. I'll go for...
You can have that one as well.
Fuck. Because I just think there's a lot of utility with the word fuck. You know, can be applied to pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And fuck off, and even that fuck off can be like, you know, that's so good it's like, oh fuck off, or it can be, oh fuck off. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I think it's the fact that it can be used in so many different ways.
Yeah, it could be used in a term of endearment, can't it? You know, oh fucking hell, you know, like
exactly, yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it, but on Netflix there's a series called I think it's called The Invention of Swearing, or the history.
Oh,
of
I haven't seen it, but I've seen it on the advertised. Like, yeah, is it good?
Do you know, if you've got nothing else to watch, it's worth putting on just to. It's quite funny. And it's interesting. It explores the history of swear words and sort of where they come from and the meanings behind them. And
okay.
Yeah, it's obviously it's quite light-hearted and it's quite funny, but it's it's probably worth a watch.
I'll have a good watch.
And I think fuck's the first one that they talk about. So
fuck yeah.
Okay, question 8. What profession, other than the one you have now, would you like to attempt?
Oof, that's a good question. I like that question. So I don't really, I don't see myself as that sort of person who has like a dream job as such, you know. But I do have there's an awful lot of professions that I would love to have a go at, or you know, in another life, would love to have tried to go into. I'd love to have a go at being a surgeon. Being a surgeon to me just blows my mind. Some of the things that, you know, and the advancements in, I guess, in medicine and medicine technology. The things surgeons that you hear doing now, and obviously I suppose it is the kind of humanistic aspect of it, in that the positive contributions you make to people's lives. But it's just what blows me away is I suppose the mechanics of it. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, a surgeon. I'd love to be a surgeon.
Yeah, I think that'd be quite a cool job. Definitely. Question 9: what profession would you not like to attempt?
I would hate to be a sports referee, particularly a football referee. Nothing against football, I'm a football fan, but I could not for the life of me be a referee. And if I had to do that job, I think I would scream into a pillow every day and night. I would not like that job at all. No,
Yeah, I'm
couldn't do it.
definitely with you on that one. Definitely, no matter what you've done, I don't think you could make someone's not going to be happy with you, are they? You know, the other
Yeah.
team generally. It's very rare that you see a referee being 100% spot on, where both teams can walk away and go, do you know what? Yeah, that was fair. There's always something, isn't there? So even if the referee's made some really good decisions, there'll be somebody on the opposite team who thinks they made a bad decision.
Yeah, you've got no chance of glory as a referee, you know. And I guess my self-esteem couldn't handle that. No, couldn't do that job. Good luck to them.
Okay, question 10. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I'll say I'd like to. I'll put two things into a sentence. That just come to me now. And again, this is, as you were saying at the beginning, Brian. This would change each day. I think each time we did these questions. You did a good job, and everybody that you know that came here before you is in the bar at the back, and it's your round.
Yeah, that's quite a nice. Feels quite nice, that, I think that. Yeah, that's quite a good one. Yeah, they're really good, those questions. And as I say, there was probably a couple on there that maybe. Well, I didn't know what I was expecting you to say, really, because I know last week when I answered them, I didn't know what I was expecting to say. And the questions, I'm reading the questions off a piece of paper, and they've got my answers written down underneath them, and I'm looking at them and I'm thinking.
Disagreeing with yourself?
Yeah, like the profession one. I said a pilot. I think I said it. I don't even. I'm scared of flying. Well,
You're scared of heights.
I'm scared of heights. So yeah, they're really interesting. But there's some good answers there, Mark. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, thank you. No, I did. As I say, I honestly didn't kind of, think about them and revise and think about what answers I'd give or I'd want to give or whatever. So.
Yeah, and I don't.
But yeah, I like those questions.
Sorry, I don't think you could. It certainly didn't come across like you'd revised them, because I think you could see that you were putting a lot of thought into to the answer. And I think, like we've said, they're the type of questions that you could have sat there all week and thought of the answers, and still today give a different answer depending on
definitely
how you're feeling.
Without a doubt, yeah. And as you're saying, it's that. I guess you learn a bit similar to. The measures in therapy sessions that you mentioned earlier on, Brian. It's that sense of you're likely to learn something about yourself when you answer the questions, as well as the other, the person who's asking you them, as well as them learning about you. So, yeah, well, we'll definitely come back to them, and hopefully in future episodes when we have guests on, we're going to ask them those questions as well and see what comes up.
Yeah, be interesting.
So, this episode, as we said, is called "What's the Point in Therapy?"
Mm-hmm.
What's the point in therapy? It's all in the tone, that question, isn't it? I find the more I think about that as a title, the more I think it's definitely a tone-informed meaning to that sense, to those words in it. Because you can say, "What's the point in therapy?" Right? What's the point in therapy? And so on and so on. But what is it? What if we were to give that a kind of, if we were to try and answer that, what do you think is? What's a clear answer to what's the point in therapy?
Well, I think before you can answer that question, it might be worth maybe just exploring a little bit around the definition of what counselling is. I think if we explore that a little bit, then that might bring about the answer to that question. So what I've done is I got the definition of the BACP, which is the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy.
Okay.
And their definition is, and I'll just read this out, it says, the BACP definition of counselling and psychotherapy states that counselling and psychotherapy are umbrella terms that cover a range of talking therapies. They are delivered by trained practitioners who work with people over a short or long term to help them bring about effective change and all enhance their well-being. So that's the BACP definition of what counselling is.
Okay, it's quite an official, which I guess it's of course, yeah, it's an official definition. It sounds quite very clear, very. So I want to say professionalised, and I'm not having a go at the BACP there, because I completely, I think it serves its purpose, and it does what it needs to do, in my opinion, that definition. But if I had no, I'm trying to imagine I had no kind of other understanding of therapy and the world of therapy and mental health. If I read that, all of the things that you've mentioned there, apart from being a qualified therapist, a qualified professional, I reckon I could get those things. I say at different points in my life, and I suppose the things would change depending on different stages and points in my life. I could probably, I could put an argument together to say I could access and get all of those things outside of therapy. I wouldn't need to go to therapy for kind of resolving relationship issues, or feeling like I'm speaking in confidence with somebody, and that. So what's the difference between therapy and accessing those things outside of therapy? I guess would be my go-to there.
Yeah, definitely, because I think, often you'll speak to people, won't you, of thinking about going to therapy, counselling, or looking for help, and their perception is it's just going to talk to somebody. I'll just sit in a room and talk to somebody. I could sit in a room and talk to my family, my mum, my dad, my brother, my sister, my partner, my children, whatever it might be. So what's the difference? And I think, I always encourage my clients to speak to family if, hopefully they've got a good family network, and, they can sit down and discuss how they're feeling and, what's going on for them. I think that's really important, and it can be a really good support for people. So I definitely encourage people to talk with family. The problem is, or the difference between talking to your family and talking to a therapist is, with family there's a lot of emotion involved. They love you, they want to make things better, they want to fix it, they want to be able to, somebody goes to them and say, look, I'm feeling this way, and often the initial instinct of the person they're talking to is to fix it for them, to make it better. And as we know in therapy, sometimes it's not about making it better or fixing it. Sometimes that's not what therapy is about. Plus also, and I don't know what you think about this, Mark, but it's very difficult for family, more so than, we'll get on to talking about friends, I think, in a minute, but certainly for family, it's very difficult to be objective.
Yeah, I completely agree, yeah. And everything you've just said, I agree with, Brian, and I think it's that. With when I was listening to you describe, the I guess the difference, or what can often happen when you how important it is for those the support networks within your personal life. They're just, they're invaluable, and as you say, families can be a great example of that. But the thing that was coming up for me the more you were talking there was, it's often a binary, isn't it? And I suppose what I'm thinking of when I say that is, it's either they want to try and fix the problem, so they'll take your side if it's, let's say, it's a relationship issue, or it's a particular a work issue, or it's a problem that you see is, okay, so that's the thing that is, triggering an awful lot of self-criticism or anxiety, or low mood, whatever it may be that's going on for the person. Family members, I think, and I don't think this is just in my experience either, I've found a lot of I've come across this quite a lot with clients, as well as just in my own life. With family members, they're either going to take your side and try and fix the problem for you, or tell you how you could fix the problem, because as you say, they love you and they want to kind of they want to help, you know what I mean, or they want to stick up for you in some way. Or sometimes it can go the other way because they've obviously got their bias or their biases about you. Do you know what I mean? They've got their subjective perception of you. So they may go the other way and say, oh, well, you need to do this, or I know what you're like, you might be a bit like, you know, and become quite judgmental. You know, we'd like, hopefully in a very well-intentioned way. But either way, whether they become really supportive and combative in a supportive sense, or they can be judgmental in a maybe placing the blame, if you like, on you, or the responsibility on you to resolve it in some way, to resolve whatever the problems are in some way. Either way, it's not really productive. It can often not be very productive in the long term for the person. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And like we said, I think, you know, having family to talk to and be able to, you know, get some support off is invaluable. I think that's really, really important. But I think to look at on a deeper level and to really understand what the issue is, or to be able to figure out what you need to do to be able to work through that particular issue. Sometimes family, and from my experience, and I'm talking here of family who are very supportive and loving. It's done out of love. It comes from a place of love to try and help that person. But unfortunately, sometimes it can have the opposite effect.
And it comes back to what you were. Sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking. It comes back to what you said before. You know, it's just intrinsic, kind of inbuilt to the equation of a family, if you like, to the dynamics of being family members and relatives. It's subjective. You know, it can never not be subjective because you're family members. Do you know what I mean? So
there's a lot of emotion involved.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that sort of takes us on to the next sort of step in that of sort of friends. You know, friends are really important. And again, I encourage people, if you're with your mates, you know, if you can't talk to your family when you're with your mates, whether that's in the pub or, you know, go in the gym with them or go on the match or, you know, whatever it might be, whatever you
weekends
do with
away
your
mates,
or just go on hiking or you know, going on little weekend breaks and things like that, or just, you know, talking over the telephone, really,
catching up over a tea or a coffee. Do you know what I mean? It's having those positive relationships with your friends is invaluable, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think even more so if you can open up a little bit and talk about things that you may be struggling with or worrying about or going through. And again, you know, getting advice can be helpful. You know, never underestimate getting advice off people. I think it's just about them being able to look at that advice objectively and then being able to make a decision based on, you know, advice and things like that. But again, the same things start to come into play. If you've been friends with someone for, well, even a year, but I'm thinking long-term friends, like 10, 20, 30 years, there's a lot of emotion involved. There's a lot of, you know, we fit into characters, don't we, when we're with our friends and people. We become, if we're going to get into theory, we sort of become our perceived self, where, you know, we act in a way that we like people to think that's how we are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and I think and we all do that. I guess it's inbuilt into friendships and relationships, isn't it? There's a version of ourselves that we perform, as you say. You know, it's very, you know, it's a very counselling way to look at things. But I completely agree. You know, it's played out every day, and we all do it. We perform our friendships, which is brilliant. But of course, again, it comes back to that same, I don't want to say an issue, but that same point of it's then subjective and there's a lot of emotion involved, and it may not always be what we're looking for if we've got our own kind of personal stuff going on, personal emotions or personal, you know, concerns, if you like.
Well, your friend's going to come at from their point of view, aren't they? And they're going to come at it from, for example, if you take a relationship, for example, if you're talking to your friend about a difficult situation you're in a relationship, often your friends will only come at it from their own experience. So if they've had a bad relationship where it's ended badly, that their advice will be based on their own experience or if they've had a really good relationship, then it'll come at it from that experience. And again, sometimes if you're lucky, it can be helpful, but sometimes it can be unhelpful, and it's a bit of a, I don't know if gamble's the right word, but it sort of is. You know, advice is, isn't it? You know, because advice is only that person's perspective, and that perspective is often built on their own experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I completely agree with what you're saying, Brian. It's a risk, isn't it? It is a bit of a gamble. I think that is a good word to use with advice, and that is not at all to kind of to try and, you know, be reductive or to be negative about having good friendships and great family relations as well. It's quite the opposite. I guess what we're saying is, or what I'm thinking with that is, it's just to have that awareness that advice has always got a lot of complexities built into that communication. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
Into that conversation. And yeah, I think gambling, as you know, it is a risk when you're. The other thing I just want to pick up on there is when you know, when you get advice of somebody else, or when we look towards friends or family, which we can all, I've certainly done this many times in the past, we might look towards, you know, certain family members or certain friends for a bit of life advice, you know, or a bit of got a personal problem or emotional kind of issues going on for me. There's something that I kind of only like realised, and I guess learned about over the last couple of years, is it's a little bit of a flawed. Well, there's a huge flaw in that process, and for me, the huge flaw is, if it goes well, it's not really empowering me as a person, because it's you, Brian. Let's say it was you as my friend. You gave me that advice, so I'll come to you next time I've got a problem, and you can solve the next one for me. Do you see the problem? Obviously, we can see straight away the problem that's going to develop with that. If it doesn't go well and your advice doesn't solve my problem, well, then it's your fault. So I can place that onto you. Again, I'm not being empowered, because I'm not kind of developing my self-awareness, my self-understanding, my self-acceptance. There is an inbuilt flaw for me in putting, as you say, too much emphasis on advice from friends or family. It's all about balance, isn't it? I guess there's a lot of value, but at the same time, when we say, you know, what's the point in therapy? I guess what we're saying at the moment is there is a big difference really between seeing, understanding conversations with friends and family as the same as I'll just do that, and I'll, you know, instead of, you know, allowing myself to explore myself and what's going on for me in a bit more of a therapeutic way.
Yeah, and again, you know, thinking about advice, you know, if I'm buying a new car or thinking about getting a new job or something like that, I will get advice off people around me to then make an informed decision about what I want to do. But, and again, I don't want to go too much into theory, because I think that could be a whole episode on its own. But
yes.
Know, when we're talking, I think what we're talking about there, what that brings up for me is sort of a locus of evaluation. You know, trusting your inner.
So what's that locus of evaluation?
So in person-centred counselling, one of Carl Rogers' theories is the locus of evaluation, and we have an internal locus of evaluation where we internalise what we're thinking and feeling to make a decision, or an external locus of evaluation is where we look for the answers externally off other people. In person-centred counselling, the idea is to trust more your internal locus of evaluation, because ultimately the theory is, and the belief is, that we all have the answers to our problems, issues. We've all got the answers within us of what we need for us, ourselves. But through life events, through, you know, and this is why I'm saying it could be an episode in itself, through, you know, conditions of worth, and, you know, through our upbringing, our life experiences, sometimes people don't trust their internal locus of evaluation, so they look for it for other people. But like we've discussed, sometimes other people's advice is not the best advice for ourselves.
Yeah. No, definitely, and I think Roger said you're always on a spectrum with your locus of evaluation throughout your life, aren't you? You'll never be completely one or the other, but you can be closer to one than the other. Obviously, it's on a spectrum, and I think definitely, I mean, that would be a great episode. I'm sure we can plan that in the future. But it's, I guess that it's that thing, isn't it? You know, as you say, the external locus of evaluation is inbuilt into the world that we live. This idea of what other people think about us and what other people's judgments and perceptions are of us is of value to us. And I guess it's the way we then interpret that, because to a certain extent it has to be. If you're going for a job or if you're going out and wanting to engage with other people, their perception of you is good, then a part of your, you know, your world, isn't it, and your kind of your perception of yourself. But it's, you know, to continue with that, you know, those Carl Rogers kind of theoretical concepts, it's on that spectrum. It's how are you someone who's dominated by an external looks for valuation, or are you kind of, have you explored yourself a little bit more before you look towards getting advice and problem solving externally?
And I think once you're aware of that, or once you know where you're at with getting advice off people but not necessarily taking it fully on board, you know, you're able to take bits of advice off people, internalise it, and still come up with your own solution. Another one that's interesting for me is, you know, we spoke about family and then we spoke about friends. This one comes up quite a lot, and I have this conversation quite a lot. But when people go for a haircut, so, you know, myself go to the barbers, or, you know, women.
I've heard this one as well, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Go on.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I've had a conversation a couple of times with the barbers I go to, with, you know, the lads who cuts my hair, and he often jokes and sort of says, you know, there's been times where people have said to him, or he's even sort of jokingly thought to himself, you know, I'm half barber, half therapist.
Yeah.
He said, because sometimes people just come in and, you know, sit down and they'll just start chatting away, and sometimes they could be talking about the football or, you know, whatever. But then other times people will come in and we'll open up to them about how they're feeling, and
yeah,
you know,
they're very personal kind of
some
world.
struggles are going on, and it's you know, we've had some good conversations of sort of where I've tried to maybe help explore sort of what that's about. And I think for me, and I, you know, I don't know what you think about this, but I think going into the likes of a barber's, generally people go to the same one all the time, so it's the same pair, and often they get the hair cut by the same person, so they build up that bit of a relationship, that trusting relationship, where they can go in there, they can feel calm, they feel relaxed.
That's it, isn't it? It's like you're in a relaxed body in the barbers, which obviously, as we know in therapy, that's a big part of it. It's like you can relax your body, and then, you know, that part of the mind starts being a bit more active. Yeah,
and then also you know, you have maybe something in common with the barber. So whether that's you know, the football team you support, or
where you live, the local area,
yeah, just anything. There's a bit of that connection to that person that that's relatable. So that's, and then I think that builds the trust then. So you start, you know, you're comfortable, you're sitting there, you feel relaxed, there's trust there. I mean, especially, I know doesn't happen so much now, but, you know, that sort of stereotype of the barber with the cutthroat razor, you know, if you trust them enough to hold it to your throat, then
yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
You know, you've got to trust them. But even like scissors and you know, you know, there's got to be an element of trust there. But more, you know, forget all of that. There's got to be an element of trust that the person's going to cut your hair a way that you like it, and that makes you know, sort of feel good. And then I think also, just skipping right to the very end of, you think about your experience of going to get your hair cut, you know, I'm presuming 9 times out of 10 for most people, they walk out of there feeling quite good.
It's a self-care process, isn't it, having a haircut? And I know it might be might seem like an obvious one or a generic thing, because obviously, you know, it's such a not literally an everyday thing, but it's, you know, it's such an everyday thing, like a common thing. But it really is a self-care process, getting your hair cut. And I think that's a great example of a barber being, you know, a barber feeling like people just come in and just start talking to me about the personal issues. And I'm thinking, you know, you don't know me maybe, or you don't know me that well, and you're telling me things that you've probably never told your closest people and your family or partner or whatever. it's interesting you use that as an example because a barber I know who's become a mate of mine, and he said something very similar. But he said to me, "Do you know what?" He said, "It starts making me quite miserable in my personal life because of stopping. Because people so often, customers and clients will say to me, you know, their kind of most inner thoughts and feelings or problems, whatever it'll be." He said, "I'm shattered sometimes when I go home. So like with my own children or with my family or brother or whatever, I'll just be like, oh no, I can't get into like serious discussions. It's just
emotionally exhausted.
So it's that thing, isn't it? So I guess everything that we've discussed so far, like with the idea of, well, you read out that definition from the BACP, and of course I kind of hypothesise, well, I can get all that from outside of therapy. So I guess all of the things that we've said about, family members, friends, and obviously the barbers as well being a great example, they may try and fix the problem for you, or they may not be 100% listening to you. They may kind of listen to the bits that make sense to them in some way. They've got their own subjective, and rightly so, and understandably so, they've got their own subjective things, perception of you. They've got their own personal lives going on. You're not engaging. Your relationship is not purely built on you and your own thing, that your own problems or concerns.
And I think another big one is, for whether that's the barbers, your mates, or your family, is they might have all their own stuff going on. So you might be sitting there talking to them about how you're feeling or what you're struggling with, and they might only 30, 40, 50, 60% listening, because, take the barbers for example.
He's cutting your hair.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One, he's cutting your hair, so there's a level of concentration on that. But two, you might be his 12th, 13th customer that day, and he's thinking, "Oh, my feet are killing here," or "What time will we finish?" Or
and as his personal life, exactly. What am I having for my tea? As we've all got things going on, haven't we? Mm-hmm. To varying in different levels. So, yeah, of course, that's not what the barber's kind of primary role is in your relationships. You know what I mean?
You're going to get your hair cut. And I think that what that feels like to me is we're sort of leading on now to answer this question that we started with. And I think, for me, it almost feels like those steps where, family is definitely great to talk to. I 100% say to people, talk to your family, but it's difficult for them to be 100% objective. It's almost impossible for them to be objective. There's a lot of emotion involved. There's a lot of feelings involved. So then you go to friends where there still might be a lot of emotion involved and feelings, but maybe not as much as family, but it's still there. And again, difficult for them to be subjective. They will be coming at it from their point of view and how much they know of you.
It's there. I think one of the terms that keeps coming up for me as well, and I want to mention, is an unconscious bias. Mm-hmm. There's a definite unconscious bias with all of those different types of people in our life, as the family, friends, and the barbers as well.
Well, so that, like, for me again, like that next step is like the barbers, where, unless the barbers you go to is like a mate as well, but if the barber's someone that you go to once every 2 or 3 weeks or once a month, there's a bit of a relationship there where but there's no emotion involved with them, so they're able to be a bit more objective with less emotion. But where where it might become a bit grey is they're coming at it from their own perspective. They're coming at it from their own life experience, and also, like we've just said, it depends on what's going on for the barber at the time, what where he's at that particular moment, or what's going on in his life. So for me, all of those things that we spoke about are really important, and I think they're really useful for people, and I definitely encourage people to speak to the friends, family, and go to the likes of the barbers and get your hair cut, and if you feel comfortable enough to open up, do that. And it will make you feel a little bit better. Things like a saying comes to mind as sort of like, a problem shared, there's a problem solved.
Yeah,
and stuff.
definitely.
And there is some truth in that.
I agree, yeah. And it's using those positive relationships, isn't it, in your life, which all those things come under that umbrella, don't they? Those constructive, positive relationships. Really, really harness the the value in them.
But I think, and I'm hoping that this brings us to answer that question. I think the big differences with when you go to see a therapist is, you know, a therapist is non-judgmental. It doesn't matter what you go with and what you talk about. The therapist, a good therapist, is non-judgmental. It doesn't matter what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They will be objective. They will be able to look at whatever it is that you're talking about very, very objectively.
I think it's important to share as well, just for anyone who may not be aware. As a therapist, you can't work with somebody who you know.
Yeah, that's
well,
sorry, yeah.
Which
yeah.
is a big, which is exactly as you say in there. So therefore, what you learn about the person, about the client, is what's coming into the room. You've got no, no biases going on. You've got no unconscious bias from at the beginning, at least. You are working with what's in front of you, so there's no kind of, I know what you're like, or I've got these reference points from last week or years ago, which is obviously what comes with families and friends and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So and the term we use, isn't it, in therapy counselling, when someone comes, is we use their internal frame of reference.
Yeah.
So it's what's going on for them. It's how they see the world. It's how they're seeing the problem rather than an opinion of the problem. Because how they see the problem might be completely different than, as I say, if they speak to the family, how they see it. So we work with how they're seeing the problem, and if that's how they see it, that's what we work with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that's definitely one other thing, that we don't know the person until they come into therapy.
And that really encourages that objective perspective then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which is, of course, we touched on this before, but it's like it empowers the. I think that's one of the brilliant things that a great. What's the point in therapy? An answer to that. Well, one of the great things about therapy is it empowers. Therapy should empower the person, the client,
100%.
and not being objective and having that internal frames of reference does that by design.
Yeah, definitely. And I think
you're not fixing the clients and you're not fixing their problems. That's not the job of a therapist.
And as we know, because people don't need fixing, it's not about fixing. It's about them coming to their own conclusions, their own decisions, working through whatever emotion or feeling it is that they need to work through, or being able to change the way they think and feel about something. The other thing that I think we haven't mentioned as well is we sort of touched on this about like the barbers and stuff, about them not being, because it's not their job to be 100% focused on whatever it is you're talking about. When you go into a therapy session, that therapist should be 100% focused on you for that hour. Yeah. What often
as a person. Yeah.
And often therapists will have lots of different ways that they do it, but for I can only talk from my sort of personal experience. Every time I'm about to see a client, 5-10 minutes before they come in, I'll sort of do a bit of a grounding exercise. I will sort of focus, I'll prepare the session, so I am ready for when that person comes in to be 100% with that person for that hour. One of the things that we spoke about, and I think it's really important to mention that when we give the definition, then I think when you said, Mark, well, what's the difference apart from the therapist being qualified? What's the difference?
That is a big difference, though, isn't it?
But I think that is the main difference from everything that we spoke about, because I think when we talk about therapists and counsellors being qualified, it's not just sitting in a classroom and learning theory. Part of counselling process, and certainly person-centred counselling, is things like you have to, as part of the course and part of the training, you have to go and have personal therapy. So one, you can understand what it's like to be a client and sitting on the other side of the chair type of thing. So what it's like what that feels like to be a client, to go in and speak to somebody about things that you might not want to speak to your family or friends about. But also, certainly the early stages of your counselling training and therapy training, most of it's about self-work. It's about understanding a lot of your own things that have gone on for you in your life, and understanding, you know, certain blocks that you may have. Again, without trying to get into, I'm always aware about talking about theory, but, you know, in therapy, we can have transference. Transference.
Good old transference, yeah.
And counter transference, and that, and basically, without going into too much detail, what basically that means is that if a client talks about something that maybe has happened to you in your life, your feelings can come up and get mixed up between your feelings and the client's feelings.
Your biases towards that issue or that particular area of your life. Yeah.
So if you've had a bad breakup, for example, in some point in your life, and you've not dealt with that, and a client comes in because they've just gone through a bad breakup, if you've not dealt with that yourself as a therapist, that can interfere with the relationship within the counselling, and
can interfere with what you're able to offer that person as
what you're able to offer.
Yeah.
So, you know, counselling training, you learn about the theory, and that's really important, but also you learn a lot about yourself, and you work a lot on yourself.
Yeah.
Because one of the really good sayings I love, you know, about you know, if you're not prepared to go to the deepest depths of yourself, how can you expect a person to be able to sit there and do that with you?
Yeah.
You know, I think you can only go as deep with someone as deep you've been yourself, exploring yourself. And I think for me, that again, you know, these are all things to do with when we're talking about a qualified therapist. These are all the type of things that, as a therapist, that's what we've done.
That's part of the training, isn't it, to become qualified? And it encourages that that empathy. You know, one of the we're going through Rogerian counselling theory today, aren't we? But one of the core conditions of, you know, Carl Rogers counselling is empathy as well, being able to empathise with somebody. And I think if you're able to empathise with a client, you've got to have experienced that, you know, had that experience of being a client as well, you know, of, as you say, working on your own things. So I think that's a big part of it. The trust that is in, you know, that's just crucial for building that relationship, that where good therapy work can start to take place. That trust can only really come from that sense of working with the person, you know what I mean, and working on having a level of depth to what you're talking about, you know, and an understanding that this is in confidence, and we are going to talk with a level of depth about what's going on for you. Whereas, of course, the examples we give earlier on of families and friends and barbers, people of those sort of role, you know, people in those sort of roles in our life, if you like, they may not necessarily have consented to that, going into that level of depth about a particular problem or issue that you've got.
Well, again, you know, as counsellors and therapists, we follow an ethical framework, and confidentiality is a massive one of that, where, you know, when a client comes in, we will go through a contract with them to discuss confidentiality, and, you know, basically what anyone talks about is confidential. It doesn't leave the room. I don't go and speak to anybody else about what we've spoke about. There is some conditions to that, obviously, harm to yourself or to somebody else. If we feel someone's at risk, you know, we would discuss that. But yeah, you know, if you go and tell your barber that you've you know, you're feeling a certain way, you could leave the shop and the barber goes, oh, that fella there just been telling me he's suffering from depression type of thing.
And do you know what I think the bigger issue for me there is, Brian, as well, because of course, I completely agree, but the bigger issue is you don't know if your barber might never do that. They might just be someone who's like, oh, I don't, you know, I don't.
And they probably don't.
And they probably don't. Yeah, I guess most people in the, you know, barbers, for example, wouldn't do that. But you don't know that they're not doing that, and I think that can sit with you, particularly if you're feeling vulnerable. You're feeling, you know, you feel like you've got a lot going on, shall we say? That kind of uncertainty and that lack of agreement. There's no agreements that this is in confidence as such. Yeah. With the likes of your barber or even a friend, you don't know that they're not saying something else, which inevitably is going to, you know, maybe compound your vulnerability.
And even with family, you know, you could tell, for example, you know, Mark, you could tell your sister something, and then your sister's worried about you, so then she goes and tells your brother or your mum or your dad or your auntie or something like that. Which, and again, it's probably done out of a place of love, but you might not have wanted them to go and speak to other people.
Yeah.
Same with your friends. You might tell one of your really good mates something, and he's a bit worried or is not sure what to do with it. So then he goes and tells one of your other mates. And again, sometimes that can be a good thing because then everyone comes together to support you, but you might not have wanted that.
And you might not as well, I don't think it's unfair to say this because I've certainly experienced this in the past, you might not be ready for, you know, your group of mates to come round and support you. That might be, this has now made it 10 times worse for me because I'm feeling really vulnerable and really kind of, you know, threatened anyway or whatever it may be that's going on. And now, you know, I've got half a dozen of my mates saying that they're coming round tomorrow night because they want to have a chat with me about something. That's just like, you know what I mean? That really can accelerate those feelings of vulnerability and pain that you might be having.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, to come back to what we're talking about with a therapist, all that is kind of is agreed and contracted to from the beginning. I just think it's important to say as well that therapists can also offer, you also have a supervision as a therapist. Mm-hmm. So it's a requirement as a therapist that you have clinical supervision. So of course, if there is anything going on for you that a client may have brought into the room, you're checking in with your supervisor quite regularly, and you can work through your own things. And that, I think one of the great things with that, Brian, as well, is it really encourages that sense of reflection and ensuring that you're the most suitable person for the client. Do you know what I mean? Because might not be at a place where you're suitable to work with that client. What a client's bringing, you know, what a person is bringing into the room. But of course, again, you wouldn't have all of those sorts of kind of, shall we say, ethical and safety measures, if you like, outside of therapy and working with a therapist.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking now, you know, the question is, so what's the point in therapy? I think the point in therapy is it's a place where you can go, feel safe, feel listened to, feel heard, and know that the person that you're sitting with, the therapist that you're sitting with, is able to be objective. They're able to remove their emotion, sort of, you know, what's going on for them, and fully be within your emotion, your frame of reference, as we've said. They'll be, you know, we haven't mentioned this, but congruent with you. They'll be honest and open with you about how they're feeling in regards to what's going on for you. And also then, you know, the qualification side of things, they will be able to offer you things around sort of self-care, or understand maybe what position you're at through the journey that you're going through.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a big thing for me in my experiences as a therapist, is sharing our knowledge, if you like, and our knowledge around understandings of the mind, and you know, kind of, I guess, overall, like, psychological functions, if you like, which can sound like quite a pretentious way of putting it, but yeah, just knowledge of the mind and how we operate as people on a broader level. Quite often when you share just, you know, little bits and pieces of knowledge around that, clients can get as much, you know, we get as much from that. Forget clients, actually. I think from my experience when I trained as a therapist and continue to train, you get so much from it yourself, because you think, I do that as well. I didn't realise that was how that. So that's kind of anxiety, and that's not me, because I think when we feel vulnerable, often we can blame ourselves. It's like, I'm unfixable, or I'm the problem. So when we learn a little bit around it's actually an inbuilt function of the brain, that when you're feeling like that, or when you're having these sorts of experiences, the brain will look to protect you. The mind will look to go into survival mode, or the mind will look for, you know, someone to blame. So therefore, you're blaming yourself, or whatever it may be. Obviously, there's a million different ways that can play out. But I think that's another thing that a therapist can offer, is just a little bit more of an understanding of how the mind tends to operate in certain situations. You know,
I mean, a good therapist should do a good level of psychosocial education and
Yeah.
you know, be able to try and teach the client a little bit about sort of, you know, what's going on, as well as helping working through whatever the issue is, or you know, helping them sort of come to their own answers and conclusions. It's also about giving them that little bit of education around why it's happening, or why they're feeling like this, or why they're acting in a certain way. So I definitely think, I think that's what you were saying there when you marked that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Just some tools to use for yourself. You know,
Yeah.
like to obviously hopefully understand yourself a bit better as a person, and also to have be able to do a bit of self therapy. You know,
Yeah.
for in the future. So I guess, what do you think we've given a bit of an answer as such to what's the point in therapy?
I hope so, because I think it is, in a lot of ways, it's very straightforward, because a very straightforward answer is, what's the point in therapy? Well, the point is, it's a place that a person can come and get to understand themselves better as who they are as an individual, and be able to work through things that maybe they've carried around with them for a long time, or maybe it's something's just happened. So I think that's the point. But I think on a deeper level, what's the point in therapy? That it is done in a professional, safe way. I know one of the things that we were going to possibly look at today was sort of like the myths around sort of therapy and counselling. But I think actually our next episode is what's episode 3?
So episode 3, we said we were going to look at I think we said breaking down the world of therapy.
And I'm wondering,
that was our creative title for it.
and I'm wondering if you know, basically this episode's going to be, we're going to be exploring the different types of counselling: CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy, person-centred, solution-focused, you know, and lots of others. But I'm wondering now if putting the myths of what counselling is and isn't will fit in quite well to that, rather than what we spoke about today. Because I feel like today it sort of comes to that natural end of which often in therapy happens, isn't it? You know, people come to therapy sessions and
expecting a particular ending or expecting a particular outcome, and then it doesn't end that way, but it ends in a way that feels quite natural and quite kind of can I say cathartic in some way,
or empowering to that person.
Yeah.
And that's what this feels a little bit like now. I feel like, you know, the discussion that we've had, I feel like if we then start talking about sort of busting some of the myths of counselling and therapy, it take us off on a different tangent, and I feel like that this feels like a nice ending. Maybe, I don't know. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I'm sitting nicely with that, Brian. Definitely. Okay, yeah. So next week we're going to have a look at breaking down the world of therapy. So we're going to, as you say, explore the different kind of what we call the modalities of therapy, the different types of therapy, what they involve, and what they tend to be seen as most suited for in terms of what people tend to access those different types of therapies for. And we'll do a little bit of myth busting as well, like some of the assumptions and the kind of cartoon imagery around therapy, and see how much reality there is in some of those myths.
Yeah, I think that'll be good. I think, you know, often you'll say to people, do you know about therapy, counselling? Oh, I've heard of CBT, but they don't know what CBT is. They just heard the word CBT, for example.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be good to maybe go through each one of them and briefly sort of have a little chat about what each one is, what it's for, what it can be helpful for, but maybe what it's not so helpful for. And then, I think sort of talking about some of those preconceptions that people have of therapy, of what it is and what it isn't, would fit into that nicely, I think.
Yeah, sounds good to me, right?
Yeah, so...
Well, I enjoyed that.
Episode 2 finished. Me too, and I think that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. See you next time.
It's good, then.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, once you get into it, the old what's the point in therapy? It's like